Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Gavin Lancaster had always believed in loyalty and love, in the vows he had spoken to Celeste 8 years ago. But that belief shattered the moment he stepped into his own bedroom and saw his wife tangled in the arms of another man, Dominic Harlow, his biggest business rival. The air was thick with betrayal. The scent of expensive perfume and sweat mixed in the dimly lit room. Celeste's laughter, a sound he once loved, was now a knife slicing through his chest. She didn't look guilty. She didn't scramble for an excuse. No, she just smirked as if Gavin was nothing more than a fool who had walked into the wrong moment. "You weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow," she said, slipping out of the bed effortlessly, pulling the silk sheet around her body as if she was the victim here. Gavin felt like the ground beneath him had collapsed. He had spent the past 5 years building a business empire, making sure Celeste had everything. A life of luxury, wealth, and security. And this was how she repaid him? Dominic, half-dressed and completely unbothered, leaned back against the pillows, watching the scene unfold with amusement. "Guess the secret's out," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "Took you long enough to figure it out." Gavin clenched his fists, his mind racing between rage and devastation. "How long?" His voice was eerily calm, too controlled for the storm brewing inside him. Celeste shrugged, picking up a glass of wine from the bedside table. "A year, maybe more. Does it even matter now?" It did. It mattered more than anything. "I gave you everything," Gavin said, stepping forward, his presence suddenly suffocating. "I trusted you." Celeste chuckled, taking a slow sip of her wine. "And that was your mistake. You've always been predictable, Gavin. Always so desperate to be the perfect husband, the perfect businessman. But Dominic? He's different. He knows what he wants and he takes it." Dominic smirked, draping an arm behind his head. "You really should have seen this coming, man." Gavin's jaw tightened. He could feel the rage curling inside him, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Instead, he turned to Celeste, his voice steady, his eyes cold. "You'll regret this," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "I promise you." Celeste tilted her head, amused. "And what exactly are you going to do, Gavin? Cry about it?" A slow smile stretched across his lips, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was something darker. Something that made Celeste's confidence falter for just a second. "You'll find out soon enough." And with that, Gavin turned and walked away, leaving the woman who had shattered his world. But what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. What would Gavin do next? How far would he go for revenge? Gavin didn't go home that night. He didn't even go to a bar to drown his sorrows like a man who had just lost everything. No, he checked into a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of Seattle, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the divorce papers Celeste had thrown at him before he walked out. It was all planned. She hadn't just cheated, she had been preparing to leave him. The house was already in her name, the bank accounts drained of every dollar he had put in her trust. She had taken it all. And Gavin? He had nothing left except the company he built with his bare hands. His phone buzzed with messages, but he ignored them. He could already imagine what they said: empty apologies from Celeste, mocking texts from Dominic. None of it mattered. Not anymore. Gavin wasn't a weak man. He had built his business from the ground up, fought his way through ruthless competition, and emerged victorious every time. He wasn't about to crumble over this. No, he would rise. He would make sure Celeste and Dominic regretted the day they ever crossed him. He picked up his phone and made a single call. "I need information," he said to the person on the other end. The voice on the line chuckled. "On who?" "My wife and Dominic Harlow." There was a pause, then a knowing laugh. "Ah, I see. You want dirt." "I want everything," Gavin said. "Every secret, every lie. I want their world to burn." The deal was made in seconds. And just like that, the first step of his revenge was set in motion. This wasn't just about payback. This was about taking back control. Gavin spent the next few weeks in complete isolation, working in the shadows while Celeste and Dominic flaunted their affair to the world. The media picked up on it. Headlines painted him as the broken-hearted businessman, the man whose wife had left him for his rival. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Gavin wasn't broken. He was planning. With every piece of information he gathered, a new plan formed in his mind. He learned that Dominic was running his company on fraud, bribing officials, faking revenue reports, manipulating stock values. A single scandal could bring him down. Celeste? She had skeletons of her own. Before marrying Gavin, she had been involved in multiple affairs, some with high-profile figures who wouldn't want their names exposed. Gavin knew he could destroy them both instantly, but that wasn't enough. A quick downfall wasn't satisfying. No, he wanted them to feel the weight of their choices, to watch their world crumble piece by piece. So he did what he did best. He started playing the long game. Step 1. Destroy Dominic's business from within. Step 2. Turn Celeste's high society world against her. Step 3. Make them watch as everything they built together fell apart. He wasn't going to fight them head-on. He was going to be the ghost in their shadows, pulling the strings, making them paranoid, watching as they turned on each other. And by the time they realized what was happening, it would already be too late. Gavin Lancaster wasn't just getting revenge. He was about to ruin their lives forever. Gavin didn't rush. Revenge wasn't something you served in a moment. It was a meal best prepared over time, layered with patience and precision. He wasn't going to throw a tantrum and expose Celeste and Dominic in one reckless move. No, that would be too easy. Too merciful. Instead, he started small. The first thing he did was hit Dominic where it hurt the most. His business. Gavin had spent years building powerful relationships in the corporate world. He knew which hands to shake, which strings to pull, and most importantly, which whispers could ruin an empire. A few well-placed rumors in the right circles, and Dominic's investors started asking questions. Why were some of his reports inconsistent? Why were certain contracts missing signatures? The stock price didn't crash overnight, but it started showing signs of instability. And that was just the beginning. Next, he turned his attention to Celeste. She loved high society, the galas, the exclusive invitations, the prestige of being married to a wealthy businessman. But what if suddenly she wasn't so welcome anymore? Gavin made an anonymous tip to a high-profile journalist, one who thrived on scandal. A small, seemingly innocent article appeared online, questioning how Celeste had managed to transition from being a struggling artist to a wealthy socialite overnight. It didn't outright expose her affairs, yet, but it planted doubt. People began to whisper at the charity events she attended. Certain wives, once friendly, now looked at her with suspicion. Invitations to exclusive events quietly disappeared from her inbox. Celeste didn't realize it yet, but the world she built with Dominic was starting to crack. And Gavin? He was just getting started. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Which city? Drop it in the comments, I want to know. And if you're still here, locked into this story, you know things are about to get really interesting. So before we dive deeper, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Because Celeste and Dominic? They have no idea what's about to hit them. Now back to the story. Celeste sat in her luxury apartment, scrolling through her phone, her eyebrows furrowing at the messages flooding in. People were talking about her. Have you seen this article? One of her acquaintances texted. People are saying crazy things. Celeste's hands tightened around her glass of wine. She clicked on the link, eyes scanning the words rapidly. A rising socialite with a hidden past? Who really is Celeste Lancaster? Her heart pounded. The article wasn't outright damaging, but it was dangerous. It raised questions she didn't want anyone asking. She tossed her phone on the couch and turned to Dominic, who was pacing near the window, his own phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what the damn reports say. Dominic snapped at someone on the other end. Fix it. Celeste watched him carefully. He looked tense, worried. His usual arrogant confidence was starting to crack. She took a slow sip of her wine. Something wrong, darling? Dominic shot her an irritated glance. Our stock is down 5% this morning. Some idiot investors are panicking over rumors. Rumors? Gavin. Celeste's stomach twisted. Was this his doing? Was he behind the article too? She shook off the thought. No, Gavin wasn't that kind of man. He was predictable, weak. A broken-hearted fool who probably spent his nights crying into a whiskey glass. Right? But deep down, something gnawed at her. Something told her she might be very, very wrong. Celeste prided herself on control. Control over her image, her wealth, and most of all, her narrative. But lately she felt like someone else was pulling the strings. For the past week, whispers had followed her everywhere, at charity galas, private brunches, and high-end boutique openings. Women who once envied her now greeted her with fake smiles, their eyes scanning her with suspicion. Then it happened. At an exclusive rooftop event in downtown Seattle, she walked in expecting admiration. Instead, she found stares, hushed conversations, and a feeling of unease creeping under her skin. Then she heard it. "I heard she used to be some struggling waitress." "Yeah, and she slept her way to the top. Married Gavin just for the money, then ran off with Dominic. If that's true, she's not just a cheater. She's a gold digger." Celeste's blood ran cold. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Who said that?" Her eyes scanned the crowd, but no one looked at her directly. "Cowards." Dominic appeared beside her, a glass of whiskey in hand. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, taking a sip, his tone indifferent. Celeste gritted her teeth. "People are talking." Dominic sighed, as if this was all an inconvenience rather than a growing problem. "Let them. It's just gossip. It'll die down." But Celeste wasn't so sure. This wasn't just gossip. Someone was feeding these rumors, pushing the right buttons, making sure the cracks in her reputation spread like wildfire. And there was only one person who had the patience and intelligence to do it. Gavin. She clenched her jaw, a chill crawling up her spine. If he was behind this, if he thought he could break her this easily, he was dead wrong. Gavin sat in his private office, watching the chaos unfold from a distance. The phone on his desk buzzed. A text from his source. "It's working. Celeste is unraveling. Dominic is brushing it off for now." Good. Let him be overconfident. Let him believe it's all meaningless chatter. Because this was just step 2 of the plan. Step 1 was planting the seed of doubt in their world. Step 2? Hitting them where it truly hurt. Dominic's company wasn't built on solid ground. It thrived on manipulation, backdoor deals, and fraudulent financials. All it took was a little nudge in the right direction for it to start collapsing. And Gavin had all the proof he needed. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. The man on the other end answered immediately. "You ready to leak the documents?" Gavin asked. A pause, then a low chuckle. "Absolutely." Gavin leaned back in his chair. "Then do it. Make sure it gets to the right people." Within hours, anonymous reports began circulating among the financial elite. Questions about Dominic's company surfaced in the business world. Investors started pulling back, stocks dipped, and a storm began to form over Dominic's empire. But that wasn't all. Gavin had one more deliciously cruel twist to add. A package was delivered to Celeste's penthouse that evening. Inside was a single framed photograph. A picture from years ago, her wedding day. Her and Gavin. Smiling. Happy. Attached was a handwritten note. "You should have loved the man who built you. Instead, you chose the man who will destroy you." When Celeste saw it, her hands trembled. For the first time since she walked out on Gavin, she felt genuine fear. Celeste slammed the picture frame down onto the glass coffee table, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She hadn't felt this way in years, helpless. Dominic was pacing the room, eyes glued to his phone. He had been dealing with his own problems all day, panicked investors, business associates turning cold. "We have bigger problems than your ex-husband's childish games," he snapped. "My stock just dropped another 3 points." Celeste swallowed hard, forcing herself to appear unbothered. "So fix it." Dominic shot her a glare. "It's not that simple." She watched him closely. The frustration, the stress, the way he avoided looking at her. He wasn't telling her something. "Dominic," she said slowly, stepping toward him. "What's really happening?" Silence. Her gut twisted. She knew this man. He was selfish, always looking out for himself first. And then it hit her. He was already planning his escape. He would abandon her the moment things got worse. She had left Gavin because she thought he was weak. Because Dominic had promised her a life of power and security. But now, standing in this apartment, with everything falling apart around her, she realized she had made a mistake. A very, very big mistake. And the worst part? It was too late to fix it. Celeste wasn't used to being afraid. She had always been the woman who controlled the narrative, who chose her path and left men in ruins when she was done with them. She wasn't the one who suffered. But that was before Gavin changed. Before she started feeling his presence even when he wasn't there. The framed wedding photo haunted her. It sat on the table like a warning, like Gavin was telling her, "I'm watching. I'm coming." She had tossed it in the trash, but the message lingered in her mind. Now everything in her life was turning to dust. Dominic was distant. His business was on the verge of collapse. Her high society friends were treating her like an outsider. The rumors hadn't just damaged her reputation, they had ruined it. And tonight? Tonight she would face the worst humiliation yet. It started at a private charity gala, one she hadn't been disinvited from yet. She dressed in her most elegant gown, determined to remind people who she was. But when she arrived, the first thing she saw was her own face, on the big screen. Not a glamorous photo. Not a moment of elegance. No. It was a photo from the past. A younger Celeste, wrapped in the arms of another man, not Dominic, not Gavin, but someone else entirely. A second image flashed, a screenshot of messages years old, proving she had been cheating even before Dominic came into the picture. Gasps filled the room. Conversations erupted. She felt her throat tighten. Who did this? Oh, what? But deep down she knew. Gavin. He wasn't just destroying her marriage. He was wiping out her entire past. Every ugly secret. Every hidden betrayal. He was making sure the world saw the real her. The whispers turned into laughter. The laughter turned into outright mockery. And then, the final blow, Dominic walked out. Didn't defend her. Didn't try to save her. He just left. And in that moment, standing alone in a room full of people who once envied her, Celeste felt something she had never truly felt before. Regret. But regret wouldn't save her now. And Gavin? He was far from finished. Celeste stumbled into her apartment, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands trembled as she ripped off the pearl necklace she had worn to the gala, the beads scattering across the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had never been humiliated like that before. Never had she walked into a room and felt so powerless, so exposed. She threw herself onto the couch, grabbing her phone with shaking fingers. She scrolled through the messages, her horror growing. The scandal was everywhere. People weren't just whispering now. They were attacking. Social media was ruthless. News outlets were eating the story up. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. And Dominic? Gone. She had texted. Told. Nothing. The man she had destroyed her marriage for, the man who had promised her the world, had abandoned her the second it was convenient. Her stomach twisted. Is this what Gavin had felt when she betrayed him? She refused to cry. Refused to break down. She wasn't weak. And yet, as she sat in the dark, her world collapsing around her, a single terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if I chose the wrong man? What if Gavin was always the one worth keeping? But even if that was true, even if she suddenly wanted to undo everything, it didn't matter. Because he didn't want her anymore. He only wanted to see her suffer. And worst of all, she deserved it. Gavin sat at his desk watching the stock reports roll in. Dominic Harlow's company had officially crashed. Investors had pulled out. The whispers Gavin had started had grown into a full-blown financial storm. And now, the final nail in the coffin, federal investigations. Gavin had made sure of it. A few anonymous tips to the right authorities, a few well-placed pieces of evidence showing Dominic's shady dealings, and now? Dominic was in freefall. His phone buzzed. A text from his informant. He's panicking. Trying to liquidate assets before the feds come in. Good. Gavin smirked, leaning back in his chair. Dominic wasn't just losing his company. He was losing everything. And Celeste? She had no one left to run to. Everything was falling into place. And yet, as Gavin stared at the city skyline, he felt something unexpected. Not joy. Not satisfaction. Just emptiness. He had planned for this moment. Worked for it. Made sure every move was calculated and perfect. So why did it feel hollow? Why did it feel like even after destroying them, something was still missing? He shook the thought away. This wasn't about feelings. This was about justice. And Gavin Lancaster? He wasn't done yet. Celeste sat in the dark, staring at her phone, waiting for Dominic to call her back. But the call never came. It had been 3 days since the gala disaster, 3 days since her name had become a joke, a scandal, a warning. She had left dozens of messages, each one more desperate than the last. But Dominic? Silent. The man who had promised her everything had turned into a ghost. Finally, unable to take it anymore, she pulled on a coat, slipped into her designer heels, the last remnants of the life she used to have, and walked out of her apartment. She needed answers. She needed Dominic to fix this. 15 minutes later, she arrived at his high-rise penthouse. She swiped her old key card. Denied. Her stomach twisted. She pounded on the door. No answer. She banged harder. Dominic opened the damn door. Silence. Then, footsteps. For a brief moment, relief flooded her. He was still here. He was going to explain everything, make this right. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't Dominic standing there. It was her. A woman. Blonde. Younger. Wrapped in a silk robe that Celeste used to own. Celeste's body went rigid. Who the hell are you? The woman leaned lazily against the doorframe, smirking. The same smirk Celeste had once given Gavin. I'm Dominic's fiancée, she said. Fiancé. The word hit Celeste like a gunshot. That's not possible, Celeste whispered. The woman cut her off. He said you wouldn't take the hint. That you'd keep embarrassing yourself. But I guess it makes sense. You left your husband for him. And now, he left you for me. Celeste's hands trembled. No, this couldn't be real. Dominic loved her. He had to. But then, behind the woman, Dominic appeared. His shirt unbuttoned, his expression bored. Celeste searched his face for something, anything, that told her this was all a mistake. But all he did was sigh. Celeste, just leave. The final knife in the heart. Celeste stepped back, her breath shallow. This wasn't happening. Dominic had thrown her away. Just like that. No hesitation. No remorse. She had given up everything for him. And in return, he had replaced her. She opened her mouth, to scream, to fight, to beg, but nothing came out. She turned on her heel, heart hammering against her ribs, and ran. For the first time in her life, Celeste Lancaster had truly lost. And she had no one to blame but herself. Gavin didn't celebrate when he heard the news. Didn't pop a bottle of expensive whiskey or bask in victory. No, when he received the text, Dominic dumped her. She's got nothing left. All he did was lean back in his chair, exhale, and close his eyes. It was done. Celeste had been broken. Dominic had been destroyed. Everything had played out exactly as he had planned. And yet, why didn't it feel as satisfying as it should? He should feel on top of the world. He had warned Celeste. Told her she would regret it. Told her she would pay for everything. And now she had. But deep down there was a small, nagging part of him that whispered, "You still loved her once." Gavin shook off the thought and looked at the screen in front of him. A new email. Subject: Urgent meeting request, Celeste Lancaster. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he clicked delete. Celeste wasn't his problem anymore. She had gotten what she deserved. And he was finally free. Celeste didn't cry. Not at first. She sat in her darkened apartment, staring at her reflection in the window. For the first time in her life she had nothing. No husband. No money. No reputation. No future. And for the first time, she understood something. Karma wasn't just an idea. It was real. It had teeth. And it had come for her, mercilessly, brutally, just like she had once gone after Gavin. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Maybe if she had just been happy with what she had. Maybe if she had never betrayed Gavin. Maybe if she had chosen differently. But it was too late for maybes. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through her old contacts. Everyone she used to know gone. Then finally she reached his name. Gavin. Her last chance. Her last hope. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Would he even pick up? Would he laugh in her face? Or would he give her a second chance? Call to action. What would you do if you were Gavin? Would you answer, or let karma finish what it started? Because for Celeste Lancaster, this was rock bottom. And the only person who could pull her out was the man she had betrayed. Gavin sat in his office, staring at the city skyline. The world outside was buzzing, people going about their lives, unaware of the storm that had just passed. His storm. Dominic was finished. His company was under federal investigation. His investors had abandoned him. He was facing financial ruin. Celeste was even worse off. No friends. No money. No future. It was over. So why was he still thinking about her? His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen, expecting another business email. But it wasn't. It was her. Celeste. For a long moment, Gavin just stared at the notification. His jaw clenched. He had waited for this moment. waited for her to come crawling back, broken, desperate. And now that it was here? It felt empty. He exhaled, then pressed ignore. A minute later, his phone rang again. Again. Celeste. Again he ignored it. Then a text came through. Please, Gavin. Just talk to me. Gavin leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. What could she possibly want now? Was she going to apologize? Beg for a second chance? A part of him, a dark, vengeful part, wanted to pick up just to hear her beg. To let her pour out her regrets, only for him to shut her down and walk away. But another part of him was just tired. Still he didn't respond. Because the truth was he had nothing left to say. Celeste sat in the corner of a dimly lit coffee shop, her fingers wrapped around a cup of untouched black coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone for the 10th time in 5 minutes. No response. She had called, texted, begged. Gavin wasn't answering. Her heart twisted. He was really going to let her drown. She had always believed that no matter what she did, she could always find a way back. She had always gotten away with things. But now, she could feel the truth settling in like a weight on her chest. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. She had left Gavin because she thought he was weak. But now, she was the weak one. She wiped at her eyes quickly, refusing to let the few customers around her see her cry. Then she made a decision. If Gavin wasn't going to come to her, she was going to him. Even if it meant forcing her way back into his life. She wasn't going to let karma win. Not yet. Gavin stepped out of his car, locking the door behind him. It was late and he was exhausted. The past few months had been a long, drawn-out game of strategy, patience, and control. And he had won. Now all he wanted was peace. But peace was the last thing waiting for him. Because standing in front of his apartment building was Celeste. His footsteps slowed. She looked different. Not the polished, elegant woman she had once been. Not the arrogant socialite who had mocked him the night he caught her cheating. No. This Celeste looked tired. Well, a ghost of the woman she used to be. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Celeste took a deep breath and stepped forward. Gavin, she said softly. Please. I just need to talk. He tilted his head, watching her carefully. And for the first time he saw it. Real regret. Real pain. Real consequences. But that didn't mean he cared. He let out a small, humorless chuckle. Why, Celeste? What could you possibly have to say to me now? Her eyes filled with something he had never seen in them before. Shame. I made a mistake, she admitted. I should have never left you. Gavin arched an eyebrow. That was it? That was what she had come here to say? That's funny, he said coldly. You didn't seem to think that when you were sleeping with Dominic. You didn't seem to think that when you laughed in my face as you threw our marriage away. Celeste flinched. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then her voice broke. I lost everything. Gavin felt a flicker of something, not sympathy but something close to understanding. She wasn't lying. She really had lost everything. But that didn't mean he owed her anything. He exhaled, shaking his head. Celeste, I don't know what you expect from me. His tone was unreadable. Do you want me to feel sorry for you? Do you want me to forget what you did? Her lip trembled. No. I just wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. For the first time in 2 years, Gavin saw the real Celeste. Not the manipulative, calculating woman who had betrayed him. Not the gold digger who had used him and thrown him away. Just a woman who had made the biggest mistake of her life, and was now drowning in the consequences. And for the first time, Gavin realized something. He didn't hate her anymore. But he also didn't love her. He was free. For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then he shook his head. This doesn't change anything, he said, his voice firm. You still have to live with what you did. Celeste let out a shaky breath, nodding. I know. Another silence. Then Gavin gave her one last look. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Celeste stood there watching him go. And for the first time in her life she truly understood. Some mistakes can't be undone. And some people? They never come back. Celeste walked slowly through the cold streets of Seattle, the rain soaking her through her thin coat. The city lights flickered in the puddles at her feet, but she barely noticed. Gavin had walked away. The one man who had once loved her more than anything had looked her in the eyes, and left her standing there like she meant nothing. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. She had believed she could control everything. That she could betray a good man, walk away from her marriage, take everything he built, and still come out on top. But now, she had nothing. She used to walk these streets in designer heels, a Chanel bag on her arm, her hair styled to perfection. Now she looked like just another lost soul in a city that didn't care. She passed by a small diner, its neon sign buzzing. Her stomach ached. When was the last time she had eaten? She hesitated. Just months ago she would have never stepped into a place like this. But that was before she became the kind of person who had nowhere else to go. With a deep breath she pulled open the door. Inside, the warmth hit her instantly, the smell of coffee and cheap burgers filling the air. A waitress, young, bright-eyed, approached her. "Table for one?" For some reason the word stung. Celeste nodded slowly. "Yeah, just one." And as she sat there, staring at the menu she couldn't afford, it hit her. She had left Gavin because she thought he was beneath her. And now, she had fallen lower than she ever thought possible. Alright, let's pause for a second. If you've been following the story up to this point, you already know things are about to get even crazier. But before we get into that, let me ask you, where are you watching from right now? What city? Drop it in the comments, I actually want to know. And if you've made it this far, hit that like button. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now back to the story. Celeste sat in the diner, staring at her reflection in the window. She barely recognized herself. The socialite, the woman who once turned heads at elite events, was gone. She was just a broken woman sitting in a cheap diner with nowhere to go. Her fingers gripped the cup of coffee in front of her. She needed to do something. She couldn't live like this. Then out of nowhere, a voice. "I never thought I'd see you in a place like this." Celeste's head snapped up, and her blood ran cold. Because standing in front of her, smirking like the devil himself, was Dominic. Celeste's body tensed. Dominic slid into the booth across from her like he owned the place, like nothing had ever happened. He looked fine. Even after the scandals, the losses, the humiliation, he still had that arrogance in his eyes. Celeste hated it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. Dominic tilted his head, studying her. "You look like hell." Celeste clenched her jaw. "Gee, thanks." He chuckled, but there was something calculated in his expression. "You really thought Gavin was going to save you?" he said. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. That she hadn't expected Gavin to save her. But deep down, she had. Dominic leaned in. "Look, Celeste. You and I? We're survivors." Celeste scoffed. "Is that what we are?" He smirked. "We took what we wanted. We made our own rules. Gavin? He was always playing catch-up." Celeste looked away. That wasn't true anymore. Gavin wasn't playing catch-up. He had won. And they were the ones left with nothing. Dominic exhaled. "We can fix this, you know." Celeste's eyes snapped to his. "What?" Dominic leaned forward, his voice lower now. "Gavin thinks he's untouchable. He's not." Celeste's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" Dominic smirked. "You want to get back at him? I have a plan." Celeste's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. She had two choices. Walk away. Or make one last move. But was she really ready to go to war with Gavin again? 2 of 2. ChatGPT said. Celeste sat frozen, her fingers tightening around the ceramic coffee cup. The warmth of the diner had long faded, replaced by the cold, creeping realization of what Dominic was suggesting. "Get back at Gavin?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic smirked, leaning back against the booth. "Why not?" Celeste exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You don't get it. This isn't just about revenge anymore, Dominic. He's not the same man he used to be. He won." Dominic's expression hardened. "And you're just going to accept that?" She didn't know what to say. Because the truth was, she had already accepted it. She had tried to claw her way back into Gavin's life, but he had shut the door in her face. And deep down she knew why. Because she didn't deserve his forgiveness. Dominic, on the other hand, he didn't care about karma. He only cared about power. He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You think he's just going to walk away after everything? You think he's not watching us right now? He's still pulling strings, Celeste. The only way to survive is to take control back." Her jaw clenched. Because a part of her wondered if that was true. Would Gavin really be done with them? Or was he still watching, waiting for them to sink even lower? Dominic's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. We hit him where it hurts. We expose his weaknesses, we remind the world he's not invincible. Celeste swallowed hard. She should have walked away. But something inside her, the same self-destructive, power-hungry part that had led her down this path in the first place, was still whispering. You're not done. You can still take something back. She exhaled slowly. What's the plan? Dominic's smirk widened. Now we're talking. Gavin stood in his office, his back to the city skyline. His assistant had just placed a folder on his desk, a fresh report on Dominic's recent activities. He flipped through it, reading the latest updates. Dominic had quietly liquidated his remaining assets. Celeste had been seen with him. And now, whispers of a new scheme were surfacing. Gavin's jaw tightened. They still hadn't learned. He had given Celeste a chance to walk away, to disappear and start over. But instead, she was back in Dominic's shadow, plotting. The arrogance. The desperation. Did they really think they could touch him now? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Gavin raised an eyebrow and answered. This is Gavin. A breath of silence. Then Celeste's voice. We need to talk. Gavin smirked, though his expression remained cold. That's funny. I don't remember needing anything from you. Pause. It's important. Is that so? His tone was dry. Because the last time I saw you, you were standing in the rain, realizing that you had lost. What changed? Celeste exhaled. Can we meet or not? Gavin glanced at the folder in front of him. He already knew what she was up to. He could ignore her. Leave her to drown. But something about this felt different. Like she was walking straight into a trap she didn't even realize she was setting for herself. He smiled to himself. Fine, he said. One last meeting. But what Celeste didn't know was she wasn't the one in control. This time, Gavin was setting the trap. Celeste arrived at the private rooftop bar Gavin had chosen. She had been here before. Years ago when they were still married, before she threw it all away. Now the atmosphere felt different. The moment she walked in she knew. This was Gavin's battlefield, not hers. He was already seated at a corner table, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked, untouched by the chaos. Unbothered. As if everything that had happened had only made him stronger. She hated that. She forced herself to stay composed as she slid into the seat across from him. Gavin didn't greet her. Didn't even look at her like she was worth his time. He simply swirled his drink and said, So, what's the latest scheme? Celeste hesitated, suddenly aware of how ridiculous this was. She had come here to convince him that she wasn't out to get him. But now, looking at him, she knew he had already won. She cleared her throat. I'm not here to fight. Gavin finally looked at her. And when he did, she felt something sharp in her chest. Because his expression was completely empty. Once upon a time, Gavin had loved her. She had been able to see it in his eyes, in the way he looked at her. But now, there was nothing. Just a man who had moved on. Celeste's hands curled into fists under the table. Gavin exhaled. Let's be honest here, Celeste. You're only sitting in front of me because you have nowhere else to go. The words hit like a slap. But he wasn't wrong. Still, she had one last card to play. Dominic wants revenge, she admitted. Gavin raised an eyebrow. And? She hesitated. I think he's going to do something dangerous. Gavin chuckled. Dominic has always been dangerous. That's why you chose him over me, remember? Celeste's stomach twisted. He was never going to let her forget that. She sighed. I just wanted to warn you. Gavin leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. Let me ask you something, Celeste. She swallowed hard. What? His voice was cold. Why should I believe a word that comes out of your mouth? Celeste froze. Because she didn't have an answer. Because deep down she knew. She had lied so many times before. And now not even the truth could save her. Celeste's throat tightened. The weight of Gavin's stare, cold and unreadable, made her stomach churn. Why should he believe her? He had every reason not to. And yet she wasn't lying. Dominic was planning something. Something big. Something reckless. She just hadn't realized it until now. Because you know Dominic, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. You know he doesn't take losing lightly. Gavin let out a low chuckle, sipping his drink. Unbothered. Unimpressed. And you do. Celeste flinched. That's not. That's exactly what this is, Gavin cut in. You and Dominic are the same, Celeste. You both thought you were invincible. You both thought you could take everything from me and walk away without consequences. She felt her cheeks burn with shame. She had been so sure of herself back then. So sure that leaving Gavin for Dominic was the right move. That he was the weaker one. That she was the one who would always come out on top. But now, she had lost everything. And Gavin? Gavin had become the most powerful man in the room. She exhaled slowly. I'm trying to do the right thing. Gavin's lips twitched into something that was almost amusement. Too late for that, don't you think? Her fingers curled against her lap. I know I can't undo what I did, Gavin. But if you let Dominic blindside you, he's going to hit you where it hurts. Gavin tilted his head. And where's that? Celeste hesitated. Because the truth was, she didn't know. Gavin had no weaknesses anymore. At least, none that she could see. And that's when she realized, that was the difference between them. She and Dominic had weaknesses. Gavin had none. And that's why they lost. Gavin sighed, finishing his drink. Thanks for the warning, Celeste. I'll handle it. Celeste's heart pounded. That's it. What else do you want me to say? He asked, his voice calm. That I trust you? That I believe you? He leaned forward, his next words sending a chill down her spine. I don't trust a single thing you say. Celeste's stomach twisted. Because once again he was right. She had spent years lying, manipulating, controlling people. But now no one believed her. Not even when she was telling the truth. Dominic wasn't the type of man to take failure quietly. While Celeste was sitting in a cheap diner trying to piece her life back together, Dominic was still fighting. Fighting to stay on top. Fighting to rebuild. Fighting to destroy Gavin. But the problem with men like Dominic? They never saw the storm coming, until it was too late. It started with a whisper. A single leak. A damaging report that hit the financial networks. Then a government inquiry. Questions about his business dealings, his offshore accounts, his fraudulent investments. Then the bombshell, the SEC stepping in. The moment the headlines broke, Dominic knew. Gavin had done this. He had gone straight for the throat. And now, everything Dominic had built was gone. He was done. And the worst part? There was no way out. Celeste hadn't heard from Dominic in 3 days. She had called. Texted. Nothing. Then one morning she saw the news. Dominic Harlow under investigation for financial crimes. Her breath caught in her throat. What was happening? Dominic was being erased. Everything he had built, everything he had stolen, gone. And that meant she was alone. For the first time in her life, truly alone. She had no money. No connections. No future. Her apartment? Gone. Her credit? Destroyed. And the people who used to beg for her attention? They had disappeared faster than she could blink. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just karma. This was Gavin's revenge. Calculated. Cold. Perfectly executed. She had left him in ruins. And now, he had returned the favor. She exhaled shakily, sitting on the edge of a motel bed. She had made every wrong choice. And now there was only one left to make. Would she finally accept her fate? Or would she fight to survive one last time? Because if there was one thing Celeste knew, she wasn't ready to disappear just yet. Celeste had been abandoned before. By friends. By lovers. But never like this. Dominic was nowhere to be found. His name was splashed across every news channel, his empire in flames, his bank accounts frozen by federal investigations. She had spent 2 hours calling him. 2 hours trying to find the one person she thought would always be there. But Dominic had done to her what she had once done to Gavin. He had moved on. The realization sank in like ice in her veins. She had thought she was better than Gavin. Thought she had played the game smarter. But in the end, she had been just another pawn. Dominic had never truly loved her. And now that she had nothing left to give, he had disappeared. For the first time in her life, Celeste didn't just feel regret. She felt hatred. Hatred for Dominic. Hatred for herself. And most of all, hatred for the choices that had brought her here. Celeste stood outside Gavin's building, soaking wet from the rain. She hadn't planned to come here. Had told herself she wouldn't. But when you had nowhere else to go, when the world had turned its back on you, there was only one thing left to do. Beg. She swallowed her pride and walked inside, ignoring the glances from the security guards. "I need to see him," she said, her voice hoarse. The receptionist barely spared her a glance. "Do you have an appointment?" Celeste exhaled sharply. "No, but—" "Then I'm afraid Mr. Lancaster isn't available." Celeste's stomach twisted. "No, this couldn't be it." She gritted her teeth. "Tell him it's Celeste." The woman gave her a bored look. Then, to Celeste's shock, she actually picked up the phone. She murmured something, listening for a few moments before setting it down. And when she met Celeste's eyes again, her expression was different. Colder. "Mr. Lancaster said he has nothing to say to you." The words were like a slap to the face. Celeste's breath hitched. He won't even let me speak to him?" The receptionist didn't even bother answering. Because they both already knew the truth. Gavin was done with her. Truly, finally done. Her hands trembled as she turned around and walked out. And as the doors closed behind her, she realized something. Gavin wasn't going to be her savior. He wasn't going to rescue her from the hell she had created. She had spent years using people, burning bridges. And now, there was no one left to save her. "Let me ask you something. If you were Celeste, what would you do? Would you disappear, accept defeat, start over? Or would you fight to take something back? Because here's the truth. Some people learn their lesson. And some people don't go down without a final, desperate move. And Celeste? She was about to make hers. Because as she stood outside in the pouring rain, a single thought filled her mind. If Gavin wouldn't help her, then maybe it was time to destroy him once and for all. And this time, she had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Gavin sat in his penthouse, enjoying his first peaceful cup of coffee in months. The world outside was quiet, the city moving at its usual chaotic pace, but for him, the war was over. Dominic was finished. His company was under investigation, his assets frozen, and his empire burned to the ground. Celeste was nothing but a fading memory. He had won. But just as he took another sip, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Did you hear? Celeste tried to kill herself last night." Gavin stared at the words, his grip on the phone tightening. He read it again. And again. His stomach twisted, not with guilt, not with sorrow, but with something more dangerous. Doubt. Was this real? Or was this just another one of her games? Gavin had seen Celeste manipulate people with lies before. He had been one of them. So was this a genuine cry for help? Or was it just another move on the chessboard? He placed his phone down, exhaling slowly. If this was one last attempt to drag him back into her world, it wasn't going to work. By noon, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Celeste Lancaster, once a high society icon, was now the tragic woman who had lost everything. Some people mocked her downfall. Others whispered about karma. But some people felt sorry for her. Gavin had no sympathy. But then, the letter arrived. His assistant placed it on his desk without a word. A simple envelope. No return address. Gavin almost threw it away. Until he saw the handwriting. Celeste. For a long moment he just stared at it. Then, slowly he opened it. "Gavin, I know you have no reason to believe me. No reason to care. But I want you to know something. I lost. And I deserve it. I betrayed the best thing I ever had. And I can't take it back. You were right. About everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything at all. I just wanted you to know. I regret it. Celeste." Gavin read the letter twice. Then a third time. His heart remained steady. His hands didn't shake. Because this letter? It didn't change anything. Not the past. Not the damage. Celeste was looking for closure. But she wasn't going to find it here. Gavin took the letter and calmly placed it in the shredder. And just like that, she was gone. 3 nights later, she came to him. It was raining, again. It always seemed to rain when Celeste was at her lowest. Gavin had just finished a business meeting when he stepped out onto the marble steps of the luxury hotel. And there she was. Celeste Lancaster. Soaked from head to toe, her once glamorous aura reduced to nothing but regret and desperation. For the first time, Gavin didn't see the woman who destroyed him. He saw a woman who had destroyed herself. She didn't speak at first. Just looked at him. Waiting. And for some reason, Gavin didn't walk away. Finally, Celeste took a shaky breath. "I don't want anything from you," she said. Gavin raised an eyebrow. "That would be a first." She swallowed. I just needed to see you. One last time. He studied her carefully. Why? Celeste exhaled, running a hand through her wet hair. Because I never thought it would end like this. Gavin tilted his head. How did you think it would end? Celeste hesitated. Then, finally, she said the one thing he had never expected to hear from her. I thought you'd never stop loving me. Gavin's expression didn't change. But inside something shifted. Not because he still loved her, but because, once upon a time, she had been right. He had loved her. Too much. More than she had ever deserved. But love? Love could be destroyed. And she had been the one to light the match. Gavin exhaled slowly, watching her carefully. Then, after a long moment, he simply said, I did. Celeste flinched. Because that was it. That was the end. There were no second chances. No more games. No more love. Just a woman who lost it all, and a man who had finally let her go. Celeste nodded slowly as if she had finally accepted it. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. And this time? Gavin didn't look back. The sound of Celeste's footsteps faded into the rain, swallowed by the city's endless noise. Gavin didn't watch her go. He didn't need to. This was the closure he hadn't even realized he needed. For so long, he had been driven by revenge, by the hunger to make her pay for every betrayal, every lie. He had envisioned this moment so many times. The day Celeste would stand in front of him, broken and defeated, admitting that she had lost. And now, it had finally happened. He had won. So why did it feel so empty? His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was his assistant. The board meeting is starting in 20 minutes, she reminded him. Gavin exhaled, glancing up at the sky as the rain continued to fall. Push it back, he said. I need a minute. The truth was he didn't need a minute. He needed to decide what came next. Because for the first time in 2 years he wasn't looking over his shoulder, plotting, planning, waiting for the next move. The game was over. And now all that was left was his future. But what the hell was that supposed to look like? For the past 2 years, every step he took was fueled by vengeance. But now vengeance was over. So what now? Who was Gavin Lancaster, without revenge? He let out a slow breath, turning toward the street, toward his car. It was time to figure that out. And this time? It had nothing to do with Celeste. 1 week later, Gavin stood in his office, overlooking the Seattle skyline. The city moved as it always had, fast and unforgiving. But for the first time in a long time, Gavin felt calm. His company was thriving. His reputation stronger than ever. Everything he had built for himself. And it felt good. But it wasn't just about business anymore. Over the past week, something had changed inside him. He no longer cared about proving anything to Celeste, to Dominic, to anyone. For the first time in his life, he was moving forward for himself. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. A name flashed across it, one he hadn't expected. Samantha Hayes. He let out a soft chuckle. Samantha was different. She wasn't like Celeste. She wasn't like anyone he had ever known. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to finally leave the past behind. He answered the call. Hey, she said, her voice warm. Are you busy? Gavin glanced out the window, the city stretching before him. Not anymore, he said. And for the first time he meant it. Celeste sat on the worn-out mattress of a tiny motel room, staring at the ceiling. This was her life now. The woman who had once dripped in diamonds, who had commanded attention in every room she walked into, was now a ghost of her former self. She had tried to start over. She had applied for jobs, tried to rebuild. But the scandal never left her. No one wanted to hire Celeste Lancaster, the woman who had cheated on her billionaire husband and been left in disgrace. She had no family, no friends, no one left. A knock at the door startled her. Her heart pounded as she got up and opened it. A man stood there, a motel worker, holding an envelope. Some guy dropped this off for you, he said, handing it to her. Celeste frowned, hesitating before taking it. The moment the door closed, she ripped it open. Inside was a check. A check for $50,000. And attached to it? A small note. Don't contact me again. This is your last chance to start over. GL. Gavin. Celeste felt her stomach drop. She should have been grateful. She should have been relieved. But all she felt was emptiness. Because this was the final proof that Gavin had erased her from his life. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't love her anymore. He simply didn't care. And somehow that was worse than anything. She sank onto the bed, the check trembling in her hands. She had won many times in life. But this time? She had lost. For good. And there was no one left to save her. Celeste walked through the small town she now called home, if she could even call it that. The $50,000 check Gavin had sent had been enough to get her out of Seattle, to escape the city that had turned against her. She had no choice but to take it. Now she worked in a quiet diner in a town where no one knew her name. Here she wasn't Celeste Lancaster, the glamorous socialite, the scandalous ex-wife of a billionaire. Here she was just Celeste. No designer heels. No expensive perfumes. Just a woman serving coffee to people who didn't care who she used to be. She had told herself it was a fresh start. That she could rebuild. That she could learn to live a simple life. But deep down she hated it. She hated waking up every day to the smell of grease and burnt toast. She hated that no one recognized her. She hated that she had become nothing. And worst of all, she hated that Gavin had moved on. That he had forgotten her. That she was just another mistake he had erased from his life. And then one afternoon everything changed. She was wiping down a table when a group of businessmen walked in. It was rare to see men in tailored suits in this town. Most of the people here were blue-collar workers. And that's when she heard his name. Gavin Lancaster. Her heart stopped. She turned, gripping the cloth in her hands. One of the men was scrolling through his phone, showing something to his colleague. "Yeah, he just closed another huge deal," the man said. "Gavin Lancaster is untouchable now. The guy's a legend." Celeste swallowed hard. He was still in the news. Still growing. Still winning. And here she was, serving coffee in a town that didn't even know her name. Her stomach twisted. She had thought the pain of losing him would fade with time. But now she realized something chilling. It would never fade. And the worst part? She deserved every second of it. Celeste couldn't get the thought out of her head. Gavin was thriving. Even after everything she had done to him, after the betrayal, after the war they had fought, he had come out stronger. And her? She was stuck in this nothing town, wasting away in a diner. That night, she sat on the worn-out mattress in her tiny apartment, staring at her phone. She had deleted Gavin's number a long time ago. But she still remembered it. Every digit. It would be so easy to type it in. So easy to call. To hear his voice one last time. To ask him if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. Her fingers hovered over the screen. One call. Would he answer? Would he even care? Or would he let it ring, like she had never existed at all? Her chest tightened. Because the truth was she already knew the answer. And she couldn't face it. With shaking hands she turned off the phone and threw it onto the floor. Because if Gavin Lancaster had erased her, then maybe it was time for her to erase him too. Gavin leaned against the balcony of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker below. It had been months since he had last seen Celeste. Months since he had walked away for good. And he had never felt stronger. His company was thriving. His reputation had never been better. His life was no longer controlled by the past. But some nights, when the city was quiet, he still thought about her. Not in the way he used to, not with anger or love or regret. Just curiosity. Where was she now? Did she think about him? Did she finally understand what she had lost? And most of all, had she changed? He exhaled slowly, shaking the thoughts away. Because it didn't matter. Celeste Lancaster was nothing but a memory now. A lesson he had learned. A chapter that had ended. And as he looked out over the city, he knew one thing for sure. He would never look back again. Gavin stood in his office, watching the city skyline stretch endlessly before him. It was late, past midnight, but sleep had never come easily for him. Not in the past 2 years, not after everything that had happened. But tonight felt different. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, there was no tension weighing on his chest, no unfinished business lingering in his mind. Because it was finally over. Celeste was gone, erased from his life. Dominic had been destroyed. And Gavin? He had come out of it all stronger, untouchable. He had spent so long chasing revenge, believing that once he got it, he would feel something. Satisfaction. Closure. Peace. But now that he had it, now that he had won, he realized something. Revenge had never been about destroying them. It had been about rebuilding himself. Becoming a man who couldn't be broken, a man who no longer lived in the shadows of betrayal. And that was exactly who he was now. Gavin turned away from the window, exhaling deeply as he walked toward his desk. His phone buzzed. A message from one of his top investors. Another successful deal. Another step forward. He smirked. He had spent years letting the past define him. Now, the past was nothing more than a lesson. And he was done looking back. If you've followed this story from the beginning, then you already know. This wasn't just about betrayal. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about what happens after. Because that's the real story, isn't it? Not just the downfall. Not just the destruction. But who you become after the ashes settle. And that's why if you've made it this far, you already know what to do. Hit the like button. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because trust me, this story might be ending, but the lessons? They stay with you forever. And if there's one thing you should remember, it's this. Some betrayals can never be forgiven. Some debts must always be paid. And as for Gavin, he didn't just survive. He won. The sun was setting over Seattle, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red as Gavin walked down the street, hands tucked into his pockets. It had been months since he had last thought about Celeste. Months since he had even said her name. He was moving forward. And tonight, as he walked into the restaurant, he knew exactly why. Samantha was already there, sitting at a table near the window. She looked up, her smile easy, warm, unburdened by the past. Gavin slid into the seat across from her, studying her for a moment. She wasn't like Celeste. She didn't make him question himself. She didn't manipulate or play games or make love feel like a competition. She was just real. And for the first time in a long time, Gavin was ready for something real. "So," Samantha said, tilting her head playfully, "are you finally going to stop looking so mysterious all the time?" Gavin chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe that's just who I am now." Samantha smirked. "Guess I'll have to figure you out then." Gavin leaned back in his chair, finally at ease. For years he had been living in a story of revenge and regret. But tonight, a new chapter was beginning. And this time it was going to be his. Gavin sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the night sky stretching endlessly before him. The city hummed below, alive as always, but for the first time in years he felt no need to chase anything. No need for revenge. No lingering weight of betrayal. He had let it all go. Celeste was nothing but a memory now, a lesson written in the past. He didn't wonder where she was, didn't care if she regretted what she had done. She was no longer part of his story. And Dominic? He was exactly where he belonged, buried in legal trouble, powerless, forgotten. Everything had come full circle. Gavin had spent so long thinking revenge was the end game, that once he got it, he would finally feel satisfied. But now, standing here, breathing in the crisp air of a life he had rebuilt on his own terms, he realized something. The real victory hadn't been destroying Celeste and Dominic. It had been becoming untouchable. Becoming the man who didn't just survive betrayal, but thrived beyond it. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. A message from Samantha. "I hope you're still up for dinner tomorrow. No business talk, just you and me." He smirked, shaking his head. This was what moving forward looked like. No more ghosts. No more looking back. Just a life that was finally his. He picked up his drink, leaned against the railing, and let the city stretch out before him. For the first time he wasn't chasing anything. He had already won. And that was the real ending. Alright, let's talk. This story? It wasn't just about revenge. It was about what comes after. Because let's be real, life doesn't stop at betrayal. It doesn't end when people hurt you. It's about who you become after. So here's my question for you. If you were in Gavin's shoes, would you have given Celeste a second chance? Or would you have walked away just like he did? Drop your answer in the comments. I actually want to know what you would have done. And if you made it all the way to the end of this journey, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications because this was just one story. And trust me, the next one is going to be even better. The end.